The next thing that we are going to check regarding base select component is that it fires event called select when we're gonna choose an option. So it works like this. The moment change event gets fired on this native select element, we're going to fire select local function, which is our event handler. And this function in turn will fire another event called select, so that this event can be listened on in the parent component. So now that we know how it works, let's switch over to the test. Create new testing scenario where we're gonna say that it fires select event when an option is selected. I'm going to copy over the chunk of code to mount the component. And to fire some event, we can use the method called trigger. First of all, we have to select an element which we're gonna work with. In this case, it will be a select element. And then by calling method trigger and specifying which event we'd like to trigger, this event is going to be triggered. And then we can check which events were fired inside the component by calling another method called emitted. We are calling it on the wrapper object, like so. And after firing change event on the select element, we are supposed to see that this emitted object with events will contain two keys, where each key corresponds to event name. So we are seeing the key called change, that is the event that we have triggered manually by calling method trigger, and another event is select, which was fired right after we have triggered change event. But of course, if I'm not going to fire any events, we are expecting that this object will be empty. And it is, because none of the events were fired in this case from the component. So next, to check that proper event has been fired after we have triggered change event, we can do the following check. Let's call method to have property and make sure that certain property which corresponds to select event will be present on the object returned by the emitted method. And in the same way, we can also check that the array that is contained under property called select on this object has a length of 1. And this array is supposed to contain event payload, in other words, which data has been sent along with the select event. And just because this event has been fired only once, this array contains only one element. But in fact, the first expectation is unnecessary in this case, because by checking that property called select is going to contain an array with one element, we'll cover both cases, so we can remove this first expectation from here. And just to make sure that the select event is not going to be fired, if we comment out this line, and the test is supposed to throw an error in this case, and indeed, it is failing now. So we're checking what we have to. And now let's switch over to writing the next testing scenario. I'm gonna copy over the previous test. And in this testing scenario, we're also going to check that the proper select event is fired, but not after we are going to select an option from the select box, but when we click on the reset button, because as we can see in here, there is also click event handler, which is going to call the same function select, which in turn is going to fire an event with the name of select. Back to the test, let's change this description so it reflects the behavior we're going to test. We are testing in here that the select event is going to be fired when the reset button will be pressed. So in this case, let's find the button and trigger a click on this button. But in this case, just because we have rendered base select component by using shallow mount, in which case it is not going to render any child components, we're getting this error. We are seeing in the rendered markup of the component that the button element has been replaced with a stub. So let's get back to the test and change shallow mount on mount function call. So now we are fully rendering base select component markup along with all of its children, and this expectation is supposed to pass right now. And indeed, the test is passing. So from now on, if we will accidentally remove this listener, which calls select function, we're gonna get the test failure, because none of the select event has been sent. And that's about it. At the end, let's not forget and remove modifier only from this test, as well as this print statement, and run all tests in the project. All of them are passing. Let's continue writing tests in the next lesson.